Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here. And thank you so much, Pat. It's been a pleasure to get to know you. And I thought we could just get started with you giving a little intro into how the project came about. And then I know you're going to do some readings for us.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Thanks for having me. It's great to see everybody here. Batch is here, my husband and my son, Will, and his partner. And other authors and documentarians who used to live, we lived near each other in Washington and worked at Washington Star. And our friend Ruth is here, so it's fun to be here with some friends that and fun to get to meet new people. This project started when Batch, who I barely knew, invited me to do a presentation for a peace symposium at Oklahoma City University in Oklahoma City. And in the process of doing that, we got to know each other better, and at some point, I asked him about his family. And he told me that his grandfather was kind of famous, that he was the first headmaster of Loomis, what is now Loomis Chafee Prep School in Connecticut. And he said you could Google him, so I did, and what came up was Evelyn Beatrice Longman Batchelder.
Yeah.
So that was kind of fun. And when I saw him again and it said, your grandmother's what came up on my Google search, not your grandfather, although I could find him there. And he said, well, yeah, but she's not really my grandmother. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, my real grandmother died 2 weeks after my father was born. And my grandfather had a piece of art made for his wife, and the sculptor was Evelyn Longman. And so I was immediately curious about this story, and over time kept looking it up online, and finally in 2017, we went to Connecticut, to Loomis Chafee School, to their library, to the archives, where all of her papers are, and I discovered it was a great story. And she was a very fascinating woman. So so I thought, there are so many layers here, this actually would make a biography. So it began then. And here's how her story kind of begins. It is the least extant photo of Evelyn Beatrice Longman, 1883, second grade, Sheldon School, Chicago. Second row, second from right, in dark, heavy pleated dress with high collar. Straight dark hair parted in the middle, pulled back and fastened behind her neck. No little girl bangs, lips slightly open, eyes steady, looking straight into the camera. In her lap rest long, tapered fingers. This 9-year-old already has been tossed about from Chicago to relatives in Ontario and back again in a chaotic existence since her mother died 4 years earlier. While her classmates look grim, each seemingly squinting into the camera, Longman's gaze is clear, direct, and exudes intelligence, curiosity, expectation, fearlessness, evidence of a girl who long before she was 10 negotiated life challenges with tenacity, resolve, and creativity. 6 years later, at the end of elementary school, without money to get to a mandatory graduation event, she wasn't allowed to advance. As so many children did, she went to work instead of finishing school. And after 4 years doing office work for $3 a week at Wilson Brothers, a men's furnishing warehouse in downtown Chicago, the 18-year-old and her older sister Louise joined throngs attending the Chicago World's Fair of 1893. It was there, in the legendary White City, that Longman proclaimed, unequivocally, though it seemed like ludicrous, the dream of her life. The sisters were among the masses headed to Jackson Park, where more than 200 buildings of the World's Columbian Exposition occupied some 600 acres bordering Lake Michigan. Aboard the southbound Illinois Central Railroad's express train, Even from afar, Longman and her sister could have caught glimpses of the glinting golden dome that adorned the administration building. At the train terminal exit, the fair entrance fee was 50 cents. Then the crowd of visitors poured through the lofty grand entrance at the base of the gilded dome, surrounded by more painted murals and statuary than anyone could possibly comprehend. Sculptor Carl Bitter, for one, had created 28 allegorical groups on the growth of civilization. Outside on the festival plaza, 2 large U.S. flags snapped in the breeze, elaborate bandstands and ornate obelisks on either side. Stretched out before the swarm of visitors was a grand basin of water, representing the 400-year anniversary of Columbus's trip to America, which the fair celebrated. Along the basin, the gleaming white city, the architectural masterpiece of the fair, massive classical buildings painted white and adorned front and back, top and bottom with scads of sculpture. Designed to invite visitors to somehow shake the city grime and the day's troubles from their memory and enter an other world, it represented an extravagant, ideal universe of order. And as the consistency of the Beaux Arts architecture was meant to encourage, unity. On the entrance side of bridges with animal sculptures mounted on corners on either side of the basin was the epic Columbian fountain. Designed by Frederick William McMonnies, the huge barge of state was 150 feet in diameter, surmounted with multiple figures, the largest a monumental Columbia. The fountain's water dropped in a waterfall 12 feet down steps into the basin. At the far end of the reservoir, called the Court of Honor, was a colossal golden figure, Republic, representing the United States. Designed by sculptor Daniel Chester French, it stood 65 feet high atop a 35-foot base. In keeping with the fair's ideals, French's Republic held a globe with an eagle on top and a staff with a laurel wreath cross engraved with the word liberty, symbols representing American confidence and pride, strength and immortality, and freedom. Is this still working? Okay. The fair was born into a confusing time. The rapid growth of industry had led to the creation of monopolies in iron, steel, lumber, petroleum, and railroads. This produced great fortune for owners, called captains of industry, or often robber barons, due to ruthless business practices. Mark Twain named the era the Gilded Age, describing the thin veneer of industrialist extraordinary wealth compared to the extreme poverty of many Americans. Labor and management were in conflict, sometimes violently. Chicago's very name reflected continuing divisions in the country. Initially settled by a man escaping enslavement, Chicago was named for a wild onion that Native Americans, obviously in the Americas long before Columbus, called Chigaku. Native Americans were not recognized as U.S. citizens. African Americans' success during Reconstruction had ended when Jim Crow laws were established beginning in 1877. Separation, persecution, and killings of blacks continued with lynching and massacre. Immigration soared. People in rural areas faced with the vagaries of weather and insects, resulting crop loss and hunger, also began migrating to cities. Chicago, with its wooden houses and sidewalks, often experienced conflagrations, including the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, which killed 300 people and destroyed 18,000 buildings. As Chicagoans rushed to rebuild following the Great Fire, people flocked to the city. Some weeks, 2,000 more people entered than left. In one decade, the population grew by 600,000. In 1900, inhabitants would number 1.7 million. While businesses rebuilt and with its first skyscraper, Chicago began to move up, the need for housing did not keep pace with the swell, and the city became a place of both wealth and squalor. As immigrants, rural residents, and others flocked to Chicago for work in the stockyards, steel mills, and other industries, the cheaply constructed crowded tenements where the poor lived created health problems for their occupants. The fair then was designed to celebrate American civilization, bring order out of chaos, renew the promise that American innovation, civic spirit, teamwork, and unity were still vital in the land, assert U.S. industrial prowess, and reassure the country's populace during an era dominated by tensions over immigration, urbanization, race, class, and Euro-American westward expansion. The classicism of the white city looked beautiful to Longman. The abundance of sculpture, not only adorning the buildings, but also in the Fine Arts Palace, included some created by women. But it was the work of Daniel Chester French that captivated her. In addition to his Republic, French had created two other major works that were displayed at the fair, including Quadriga, a gilded chariot with 4 horses, representing the spirit of discovery. Working with his one-time student, Edward Clark Potter, who modeled animals, they also designed 4 12-foot-tall white statues on either side of the 2 entrances to the agriculture building. On the South Canal entrance were farmer, a man in a hat holding a shovel and the reins of a large horse, and teamster, an African-American man, one arm leaning against another of Potter's large horses. At the agriculture building's lakeside entrance, near French's Republic, stood 2 more monumental French and Potter works, Indian corn and wheat. Ceres, Greek goddess of the harvest, stood beside a massive bull holding a fistful of maize. Opposite was an Indian maiden leaning against another bull's cornstalk in hand. She was draped in a simpler garment with a head wrap fastened over her long braid. That prophetic day, the 18-year-old uneducated female warehouse worker stood before Daniel Chester French's 12-foot Indian corn and shocked her sister with these words, "I could do that. I know I could do that if I had the chance."
Yeah. Before you move on to your second reading, I mean, that's just such a remarkably bold statement for someone to make of that age, someone to make who's had no training whatsoever in the arts yet. And I'm curious, what have you, having lived with Longman for so long now in your research, what have you come to make of that prophetic statement?
Yeah, it still amazes me. I'm not sure she's seen sculpture really before that day. And to look at it and know you could do and something monumental, it's not a little piece sitting on a shelf somewhere. It was extraordinary, and I'm so glad we have actual documentation that her sister was with her and she wrote it down.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, it would be really hard to believe.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, because I've been aware of this, I have noticed in readings or stories of other people that there are some people who know in an uncanny way early on that what their life's work is about.
Mm-hmm.
And I think she bears it out with the rest of her life.
Mm-hmm.
She's so confident all the way through.
Yeah.
And it started, I think, right there.
It's wonderful. I'll let you move on to your next reading, and then we'll have a good conversation about a lot of these amazing things she did.
Let's see. So she did. She went to. She worked at that brick warehouse a little longer, a couple more years. She saved, $60 or something, and went off to Olivet, Michigan, where her half-sister lived, or a couple of half-sisters lived, and where her brother, Claude, was actually attending school at Olivet College. So she lived with them and went to classes and did just the sculpture room. She was taking German, I think, and music or something, but she discovered the sculpture room in the top of the library and did some pieces and had photographs of them. And a friend of hers, when she came back to Chicago to visit, took her to meet Laredo Taft at the Chicago Institute of Art. And I think we see her we see her determination even as a 6-year-old before all this, but when she met Taft, she was not even a high school graduate, and but she was charming, and this was going to stand her well all of her life. And she also had both charm and a strong passion for what she wanted to do. And she convinced him to let her come to the school and gave her a job in the library to pay for tuition. So she went to the art school in Chicago for 3. It's a 4-year program. She finished it in 3 with honors. She was top student. She was the queen of muscles and bones. And she was Taft's assistant. She worked with him when he went lecturing. He explained how to do it, and she did the demonstration. She also worked with him at his summer retreat with other Chicago intellectuals and artists, and it was quite a scandalous kind of place, I think, a lot of fun. So, and he wanted her to stay in Chicago, but she was determined to go be an assistant to Daniel Chester French. And French was known for not taking on women. He said because he didn't want to have to be polite. He was a New England gentleman, didn't want to have to be nice when he was working. So he said no, he didn't want women. But she did go see him, and she had a letter from his brother, who was the head of the Chicago Institute of Art. So she had a recommendation from him, as well as a portfolio of photographs of her work. And he said, no, I don't take women. So she was working as an assistant to a couple of other well-known sculptors at that time. And eventually, he did get back in touch with her. He went to one of the studios of the other artists, saw some of her work, and saw she was really as great as she and his brother said she was. And called her back and asked her if she wanted to do some lettering. He was working on the doors to the Boston Library, and he hated doing the lettering, and it was all that was left of this huge project. So she said, yeah, I'd love to. She did like doing lettering. And so that was the beginning of a lifelong friendship, and actually a very rare colleagueship, as you will see. So this bit takes place, she was his assistant for 3 years and did a little bit of her own work during that time. But then he built her a studio, a little studio in a barn at Chesterwood, but she had her studio here in New York City at Union Square, near Union Square. Actually, it was in a famous movie maker, I forgot his name, the Biograph art movie studio.
And she lived on Triscuit's.
She lived on the top floor.
And slept with a gun under her pillow.
That's right.
Great.
Okay, so this was at the end of her stay with, or her time with French. Into Longman's life now entered the first from the world of wealthy men who commissioned monumental art, Robert Means Thompson. After his graduation from the U.S. Naval Academy in 1868 and stints on 2 ships, Thompson resigned his commission in 1871 and entered Harvard Law School, from which he was graduated in 1874, the year Longman was born. Investigating legal titles of Canadian mining firms led the gregarious Thompson to a managerial position, and then the presidency of a mining company where he made his fortune. Devoted to his alma mater, Thompson never missed a June graduation week in 55 years. In 1900, as a member of the Academy's Board of Builders, he encouraged a review of the institution's physical campus and enlisted Beaux Arts architect Ernest Flagg to design a master plan for the complete rebuilding of the school, including, at the center of campus, a new chapel. Domed with a crypt for the bones of John Paul Jones, the chapel's bronze doors, reminiscent of Ghiberti's Italian Renaissance bas-reliefs at Florence's baptistry, would open into a stained glass windowed Greek cross sanctuary. The doors would be 21 feet high and 10 feet wide. Midshipmen would know they'd been to chapel. When Flagg's $400,000 budget for the chapel proved inadequate and resulting cuts included scrapping plans for the enormous doors, Thompson donated the funds for them with the stipulation that they would be dedicated to his 1868 graduating class. To find a sculptor, Thompson enlisted the aid of the National Sculpture Society. The society generally disapproved of competitions because competing artists put in so much time and money making the required models without any compensation unless they won. The society joined with Thompson to ensure fairness and professionalism, and in late 1905 they sent a call to artists to submit designs for the bronze doors. The prize was $15,000. As was the custom, from that amount the artist would be responsible for the cost of executing and erecting the doors. Estimates were that the sculptor would clear $5,000 to $6,000, a whopping amount for an artist at the time, close to $200,000 in today's dollars. It was a blind competition. The only way Longman or any other woman had a chance at winning a commission. The artist identified their unsigned work by a cipher, their name and address sealed in an envelope with the emblem on the outside. Even if Longman's model was chosen, she wasn't guaranteed the commission. Sometimes women who won blind competitions were not allowed to create the sculpture once it was discovered the winner was not a man. The jury was formed of representatives of both the Naval Academy and the Sculpture Society. Ernest Flagg, Beaux Arts architect Ernest Chambers, sculptor Charles Grafley, and Robert Thompson, though he asked Colonel G.M. Collacaressis to vote in his stead. Collacaressis was a Naval Academy alumnus who taught drawing at the Academy and designed a monument to a naval officer buried in the Academy cemetery. Chairing the committee was Daniel Chester French. By this time, Longman had finished her apprenticeship with French. To mark the occasion, someone, perhaps Margaret or her father, snapped a memorable photograph of Longman waving a handkerchief farewell. Longman walking away, head tilted and looking back with a mischievous smile as if she would show up again any second. The photo marked a poignant moment, not an end, but a shift in her situation. She was no longer French's assistant. She was becoming a colleague. Their relationship and circle of friends were at the heart of Longman's personal and professional life. In the winter months when the Frenches were in New York City, Longman often went round to their home, frequently joining other dinner guests such as stage actress Mary Lawton. Will French was at table when he was in town, as was Longman's oldest brother Claude from Chicago. Guests sometimes took to card games after dinner, and family birthdays were celebrated with special suppers and guests. Margaret often walked over to visit Longman in her apartment. Margaret was French's daughter, for long talks or walks. With Margaret, Mary, French's wife, and Daniel French, she attended art openings and plays. Once, when Dan French was sitting for Milton Bancroft, who was a painter, Longman and the Frenches went along to Bancroft's studio. There were days when they took long walks to Bronx Park. Longman wrote to French in February 1904, while he and Mary were vacationing in Mexico City. In his response, French began with a slight flirtation, as was often his way, and in the letter referred to Longman's victory, which was in St. Louis for the World Exposition there. Dear Longman, There can certainly be no impropriety in this at so long range, and you certainly are a dear to send me such a long, delightful letter as the one I received this morning. It not only told me what I wanted to know, but your gentle art of flattery as practiced in it has made me feel in a state of elation all day. I can't tell you how much I appreciate the kind things you say about the alma mater and the Carnegie figure. I have really felt more troubled and disappointed over the failure of the gold statue than I had professed. But I think it likely that your fine intuitive sense may have told you what I thought I was keeping to myself. It was very sweet of you to reassure me, and I needed it. Yes, we must do something to the gold in the spring. You very modestly say nothing about your own statue at the exhibition. I am sure that looks all right compared with anything there. Your letter sounds very gay indeed. I'm glad you're having such a good time. Affectionately, Daniel C. French. The developing Longman French colleagueship would be rare and presented a thorny-ish situation as far as competitions were concerned. The world of sculptures was a small sphere. They all knew each other. Notable ones encouraged younger ones. Talented and often talented ones, and often sat on juries in which younger ones competed. A year earlier, French had written to St. Gaudens on the issue of bias. As Miss Longman is an assistant of mine, I shall probably be accused of favoritism. In any case, somehow the enemy overlooks the fact that we are interested in these people because of their extraordinary talent. Though French knew that Longman was preparing a model for the U.S. Naval Academy Chapel Doors competition, there is no doubt that they both wanted her to compete on her own merit. As they visited each other's studios regularly, it became standard practice when she was working on a piece for a commission for which he was the judge that she kept her work covered when he came to call, including during the first 3 months of 1906 when she worked on the model for the chapel doors. Entries were due to the National Sculpture Society on West 57th Street by March 19, 1906. The jury met at the Society's rooms and viewed 33 models, marking their first round of votes using the cipher of the artist whose model they judged to be the best. When the votes were counted, the first ballot was unanimous. The judges opened the envelope containing the cipher of the winner. It was Evelyn Beatrice Longman, a woman. One judge wanted to change the selection. Though Calacaresas voted in his stead, Thompson was present in the room and insisted that they accept Longman's submission. When members of the superintendent's committee in charge of the building project were told who had been selected, they were amazed to find that the winner of the competition of the unanimous verdict was a 19-year-old girl.
Wow.
It was impossible, they said, that such an important order be given to a young and inexperienced girl. Thompson defended the jury's decision, and Longman's submission, having fully fulfilled every requirement for the competition, was entitled to acceptance.
Yay.
19-year-old Longman was actually 31 and the only woman to compete. Of the 32 men, some were well-known sculptors. The jury awarded small cash prizes to the sculptors whose designs came in second, third, and fourth. Longman made headlines. Woman vanquishes men in race for coveted sculptor's prize. An American woman sculptor wins over 32 men. Woman gets the prize. Woman sculptor wins, triumphs over men. The New York Times stacked headlines for April 7th. Woman sculptor modest, winner of contest for design for bronze doors for Naval Academy Chapel, takes her victory quietly. Her work remarkable for its atmosphere, suggesting war and the sea without actually showing them. The lead in that story, from out of the West, has come a slender, pretty little woman whose chief characteristic is her extreme modesty, who has taken away from sculptors of this city, and in fact of the world, one of the most coveted awards made in the art world this year. Daniel French was quoted in the New York Tribune. The votes of all 5 jurors were cast for Miss Longman's model on their first ballot, but it was not known to any of us until after the award was made who the winner was. I did not even recognize Miss Longman's work myself, though I am familiar with it. I consider Miss Longman to be one of the most promising of our younger sculptors.
Thank you. It's just extraordinary. I mean, in reading your book, I started thinking about the things that I've read about Longman, and there's nothing out there. There's no mention of her winning these blind competitions against all male groups of sculptors, awarded by all male juries to make monumental sculpture. And I was going to ask you this question, but I feel like it's probably rhetorical. Was bringing this to light one of your main goals in writing the book?
Yeah, the fact that she was doing monumental work. There were women, and maybe you've heard of the White Rabbits, who were women who, Loretta, before her time, well, yeah, the White Rabbits were women who Taft got to help him, who were his students at the Chicago Institute of Art, who helped him with all these projects for the Chicago World's Fair that Evelyn eventually went to and saw. So there were women, but only one, Emma Stebbins, was actually doing monumental work. And we can talk about her a little bit, but the fact that Evelyn really became known for her monumental work is the unique part of her story, I think.
Right. So moving on to some of her other work, and I wanted to bring this one up first because it relates to the work that we have in the collection by Longman. So up here is the sculpture that she gave, and just a little bit of context about her relationship to the Academy and its importance. She was not the first woman elected in, but she was the first female sculptor to become a full National Academician. So it was actually in the year that this was completed, 1909, that she was made an Associate National Academician. And it was actually Milton Bancroft who painted her portrait. I don't have an image of it here, sorry. All of these names you were mentioning of other sculptors are also National Academicians, Daniel Chester French, all that. So she gets elected into the National Academy very early, and again, the first woman sculptor to be named a full member, which happened in 1919. So yeah, I wanted to start with this one and just give a little bit of a quote for some context. So Longman was invited to submit a work for the St. Louis World's Fair in 1904 to commemorate the centennial of the Louisiana Purchase. And there was a plan for 3 allegorical victory sculptures to stand atop the buildings. Longman was invited to submit. At that point, allegorical victories were winged and female until Longman arrived. So quote from Pat's book, "A lithe, virile young man stands on a globe, tiptoed, his arms raised, one hand holding the classic laurel wreath, his mouth open in a triumphant shout. He had no wings. Longman's victory is a real guy, ideally fit, his face animated. In his stance there is an explosion of physical action and emotional exuberance. Not a stodgy god, but a firmly grounded human." And this would become classic Longman, as we'll see with many other projects. Doing the traditional thing and also something fresh, unexpected, going at least a bit against the grain. Here she used the classical idea but changed it to reflect her time, as well as the context of the figure's placement, in this case, the vitality of a modern and most human man, sans divinity. He is not bringing victory to someone else as the gods did, but he is seizing it for himself. Longman's decision to depict a personal experience rather than an abstract idea shows her interest in appealing directly to the viewer's emotion. By expanding the tradition of academic allegorical figures, Longman created a victory that spoke to viewers of her day. Longman created an embodiment of a universal emotion. So first of all, she's a woman. She's competing in a man's world in a field of large monumental sculpture that is really just kind of emerging at that point as a creative medium in this country. at the turn of the century. And on top of that, she chooses to submit something so new and unexpected. How much do you think this approach accounted for her success?
Oh, gosh. Well, I think she did it well, number one. So it's done well, so that helps. I think most of the others were, nobody's were like this. So I think a fresh eye, but with there are classical elements to this piece. So I think maybe it was just irresistible to the judges to see something so different, but yet within a classical mold in some ways.
Oh, interesting. Well, there's another great example here, a couple of years later, for the Panama Pacific Exposition in San Francisco in 1915, which she made her sculpture series. And once again, Longman had interpreted a classical figure in a new way. Sterling Calder wrote of Longman's series, quote, Miss Longman has expressed her as exultant, regal, young, far less matronly than is conventionally pictured, glorying her in power to bless the cooperative labors of man and nature. So do you think, a lot of this is guessing, I'm sure, but you've lived with her for so long, so I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on this. Do you think that Longman had any distinct message or agenda in inverting the genders and changing the ages of these traditionally associated with certain allegorical figures? And the second part of that question is, do you think these innovations in depiction would have had a similar effect if done by a man?
Of course, this was done without competition. This was done for Henry Bacon's part of the fair, his Four Seasons exhibit. This was to be a fountain in that exhibit. It turned out to be so wonderful. They moved it up front, at the front of the exhibit. I don't think a man would have done this, for sure. Well, I don't know, and certainly Bacon encouraged her. So if she was having second thoughts, which I kind of don't think she ever did, I think this comes from her. She didn't make the bull that French made. She went another way, but she knew early on and seemed so confident all along that I don't know how anybody else would have done it. I don't know if she had a big gender message. She was not a suffragette. She didn't ever talk about that, but there are comments of her kind of being witty with men and their comments to her. So I think she wanted to celebrate women and wanted the gender things to be modern and fresh. So, yeah.
Great. Well, then we can't talk about her without talking about genius of telegraphy, which informally gets known as Golden Boy. This is just remarkable. So I'm going to read another little short passage about this. So when Evelyn saw Joe, a bodybuilder, pitching a patent medicine in the window of a downtown drugstore, she hired him on the spot to be her Zeus. If she won the competition for genius of telegraphy, her towering, modern, gold-leafed bronze Zeus would stand tiptoe on a globe 450 feet above Fulton Street to crown the tower of the new 26th-floor Western Union building at 195 Broadway. Despite the architect's order for a majestic, seated god, Evelyn envisioned another virile, handsome young man standing, holding thunderbolts in his left fist, his arm raised high above his head, a la her victory's raised wreath, William Wells Bosworth, designer of the Greek-inspired skyscraper for Western Union, had in mind a classical Zeus, a mature bearded god, and specifically the Zeus atop the tower was to be seated, holding a thunderbolt. Again, Evelyn did the unexpected, though she did incorporate a thunderbolt, certainly not because it was expected, but because it fit. Evelyn didn't mix things up, do the opposite thing simply to be obstreperous. Rather, a woman's view, sensibility, and process were mostly unknown in the field of monumental public sculpture. So what she produced was unexpected, and although she was a classical artist, she considered the modern context. In this case, she gauged what the finial would look like from hundreds of feet below and determined that from a new subway station and for pedestrians coming down Park Avenue, a standing figure would be much easier to view than a seated one. Also, virile young man with his strong jaw and wavy, short hair communicated the tenor of the modern project, spirited, purposeful, strong, dynamic. And these images are just absolutely incredible. The one on the left was from Pat's book, of them lifting this up to where it would stand atop here. Wow. So she was obviously visionary. She was putting things in a modern context rather than looking back at the traditional ways of doing things, but she was also pragmatic and thinking about how the viewer is going to experience this work and how they could best receive it. What do you make of that?
Yeah, this was a technical, huge accomplishment and nightmare for the foundry. And she had to work with them to make it, I mean, he's only attached by his toes here. So they had to do a lot of work inside to make it stand against the winds and the weather. So, you know, the foundry, they worked as a team, but can you imagine imagining that, standing atop Manhattan? I mean, I think she wanted it to be spectacular, which it was. And just much more modern. I mean, it's still, now it's in Dallas on the street. It's still looking great and modern and vibrant. And the employees of AT&T don't like it others have wanted it and wanted to buy it from AT&T, and AT&T I think was willing to sell it, but the employees protested, so they still have it. And they protect it. So, yeah, I think she just had this idea of what she could do and how spectacular it could be, and she pulled it off. Mm-hmm. It is pretty remarkable.
It's pretty remarkable, and I just can't imagine how they got it up there.
Yeah, it took hours to just. It took a week to get it from the Bronze Works, and then all day to get it up, slowly moving up onto the top of the building. Yeah. And then they did the gilding after it was installed.
After it was up there. Wow. All right, so let's move on to this one that's related again to the National Academy.
Just before you go on, the building where it was in Manhattan, was that destroyed, or why was it moved to Texas?
AT&T, every time they moved their headquarters, they'd take Golden Boy with them.
Oh, I see.
So they moved him to another building in Manhattan, in the lobby, eye level, or kind of eye level, which I think would have horrified her. And then they moved him to Patterson, New Jersey, when they moved there, and he was on a pedestal, but still not at the top of a building. And finally, they're now in Dallas, downtown Dallas, and they had Golden Boys right on the street. And I have to tell you that Batch and I went to look at him, and it was raining a little bit, and there was a guard standing there with him. And I wanted to I was taking pictures, and her signature is on the bottom of his feet, his tipped up feet. So I was getting really close to get a close-up of that. And this guard had said that employees love this thing. And they're very, possessive of it. And so I'm taking this close-up picture, and I hear, "Step back from the statue." Out of nowhere, it's just some speaker somewhere. So somebody was watching over him.
Must have had a very different effect being on the ground rather than.
Yeah, I think she would have thought, "Oh my gosh."
All the work to get it up there. So I just wanted to, no real question about this necessarily, I just wanted to point it out. So this sculpture, The Future, that Evelyn submitted to the 1918 annual exhibition at the National Academy of Design, and it won a prize. So this is actually the year before she becomes a full National Academician. And in your book, I just found this part so funny. She was not happy. She complained to Daniel Chester French, who was on the awards committee, that she won the Woman Prize rather than just the best overall award. And I won't read the whole letter, but he wrote her this really sweet letter. And just towards the end of it, he says, "I'm awfully sorry you're disappointed, and I can see why, but other years are coming, and you don't want to win all the prizes at once. There will be nothing left to live for." So I just wanted to point that out. I thought it was great.
And she didn't just want the women, she wanted the women's and the best.
Yeah, she wanted yeah, exactly. So let's move on to this remarkable story about the Lincoln Memorial, because I don't think, I admit that I did not know this until your book. So Longman worked with, so Henry Bacon was the main architect, and Chester French was the sculptor of the Lincoln statue. And then there's Evelyn Beatrice Longman, and she's the only woman who worked on that. And it was a project of the three of theirs. Yeah. And so Bacon and French sought her advice from the very beginning. And Daniel Chester French even desperately sought her advice when he couldn't get the proportions of Lincoln's body correct, so he brought her to the studio, right, for her advice. So indeed, the only woman artist to work on the monument, she would fashion the ornamentation of the Lincoln speeches, including the Gettysburg Address, on the north and south walls, though for decades her name was not mentioned in National Park Service's information. And a little bit later you mentioned, honored to contribute to the national project and knowing the undertaking was well over budget, she did her work without compensation. So, and here she is doing some of her final carvings. So both Henry Bacon and Daniel Chester French died not too long after the opening of the Lincoln Memorial. Considering the extent to which they relied on Longman and supported her talent, had they lived longer, do you think they would have helped remedy the omission of her name from virtually every mention of the Lincoln Memorial?
I don't know when the Park Service started putting out information about it, but if it was during their lifetime, I'm certain they would have complained and made sure she got noted. I think it was Bacon who did say in some article that she was the only woman who worked on it. He noted that in some interview or something.
Okay.
She did the wreaths and the eagles. Eagles, you can see the feet up in a part of the wing up there on both of the speeches. But she really was there throughout the whole thing, helping in Vermont, helping Bacon pick out marble, just all along the way. And then after Bacon died, the lighting, he originally was going to have a door on the front, and there was no reflecting pool at the time it was finished. But when the reflecting pool, there was no door, and with the reflecting pool, it changed the lighting inside the building. So they had to, the Lincoln's face looked ghostly some days, sometime when the sun was wrong. So it was French and Evelyn who had to go up several times and figure out what to do about that.
So, we have time, a couple more questions. So obviously your book focuses a lot on her relationship with French. And French, by the way, was the person who nominated her for membership at the National Academy, among all of the other connections that they had. And I think it's undeniable that he had an impact on her career. Do you think it's fair to say that had French not been in Longman's life, to the extent that he was, that she wouldn't have been able to accomplish all that she did? And kind of to put it plain and simple, do you think it was necessary at that time in this world, particularly in the world of monumental sculpture, to have the support of a male mentor?
Absolutely, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it was the way things were. I think Emma Stebbins had, I don't know if they were male, but there were people influential. She was before Evelyn, and I think she had influential people supporting her and encouraging her and helping her find work. But Longman and Bacon together, she did so much with Bacon. She wouldn't have had nearly the opportunity without them.
Yeah. So the last project that I want to move on to is, so she sculpted, I guess just two, correct, of Thomas Edison. And she was the only sculptor who he would sit for, which I found really, really remarkable. So this first one she did was a kind of a life-size bust that's in the museum in Germany, or made for the museum in Germany. And then she worked on this one. Oops, sorry. Much larger. That was, correct me if I'm wrong, it was going to be for the research laboratory. No, remind me what this one was first commissioned for.
There was no commission.
There was no commission.
Unfortunately for her, by this time she's married the headmaster at Loomis. He's become her business manager. And she really loved, she did these ideal pieces like the Future, which you saw earlier. And she saw this late in her career, and she, as an ideal piece of genius, creative genius. And there was nobody, it was commissioned for nobody. So if you have small ideal pieces, you can put them in your studio, but if you have a 3-foot head, so her husband kept saying, what are you going to do with this thing? And so, yeah, it took 20 years to place this. And it was finally placed at the Naval Research Lab outside of DC, which Edison started as a research facility for the government.
So what do you, it's just fascinating to me that she's the only sculptor that he would sit for. Do you have any thoughts on that? Is it genius recognizing genius?
I think it was charm. I don't know for sure. He sat for her, it was 1930 when she did the first one. He sat for her for the first one. And then he died 3 years later. He was very ill. His wife did not want him to sit for her because he was so ill. But she, persevered, of course, and spent 2 weeks with him in Fort Lauderdale, Florida in March. And he, unfortunately, she talks a lot about, in her letters back to her husband, she talks about Mina, but not so much about Thomas. I think he was not well. He was enchanted by her scientific approach, measuring his face with calipers. He thought that was pretty cool. But he wasn't well. But I think she just charmed him. And she had met some of his other people, and other sculptors did do works of him, but they did it through photographs. And actually, Mina provided all these photographs for Evelyn. I really thought Evelyn would do it with him, but she said, no, I'm coming. So she went, and Mina made it a little difficult for her, but they came to they came to like each other and cooperate with each other and
That's good.
get it done.
That helps. Okay, so my last question, and we can turn it over to the audience. And I have to bring this up because the discussion of public monuments is so much in the air today. Issues of censorship and removal and government mandated styles and all of this sort of stuff. And in one of the first pages of your book, you pose a series of, I thought, really thought-provoking questions. And one of them was, how are we to know that what we do now may be wrong as time goes by? And it just made me think of, and I just wanted to show a couple things. This is earlier when she was first studying at the Art Students League, and she's working on this nymph sculpture for a fountain that actually ends up being destroyed by a crew of workmen. Now, I know it's not similar to what I'm talking about, what's going on nowadays. I just thought it would be interesting to show. But if she were here today with us, how do you think she would react to what's going on in the current cultural landscape in regards to these sorts of issues?
So she did I think the one, actually I know that the community where it exists in upstate New York, I talked to a reporter up there, and he said they were worried that somebody might want to take it down. It's called the Timothy Murphy, and he was a rifleman in the Revolutionary War and really killed a lot of Native people. But his family wanted a sculpture of him. She did a bas-relief of him with his rifle. And underneath it is some words, and in the middle is the face of a Native man. But Timothy has his foot on an arrow, it's broken, which is a sign of extinguishing, annihilating a culture. Which is really hard for me. It was hard for me to think that she did that without, well, she did it, you know, it's right there. Actually, I kind of had an imaginary conversation with her about that, and she got ticked off at me for bringing it. And said, you know, 100 years from now, of course you'd have a different opinion. So, I sure would, you know, you kind of fall in love with people who write biographies with a little bit, and I would hope that she would now not have done that, but I probably might have done it myself, who knows. But I think now, you know, this kind of relates to a little bit different, but she and French did not like the abstract art that came into being while they were trying to do the figurative stuff at the end, and they made fun of them, but eventually she began to she did two pieces that were quite beautiful in one with some Art Deco flourishes, and so it indicates to me that she would adjust, and she would, and also she was doing modern pieces when everybody else was still doing the figurative stuff, or figurative classical stuff. So I think she did change with the culture, and I think she probably would have had to now. I don't think she would have been happy to be prescribed what she did. In fact, I'm pretty sure she wouldn't have done it because she didn't do it when she was full-time.
Yeah.
Iconoclast, for sure.
Well, thank you so much. I'd like to open it up to the audience in case anyone has any takers. We've summed it up.
Yeah, I have a question. What about her personal life?
Oh, good question. She stayed single until she was, till 1920. She was born in 1874. She did interviews in which she talked about marriage and said at one point, you can't be married and have a career. And then she said, every woman should marry and have children, that you don't have a full life without doing that. So she was up and down, back and forth. But at the height of her career, and when Nathaniel Batchelder came along, and she did decide to marry him. She was doing a portrait of Palmer, Alice Palmer, who was the first college president, first woman to be a college president at Wellesley. I think she was the first college president anywhere. And Alice Palmer married at the height of her career, but she was very sick. And her husband asked her, or married her, and said she had to not be president of Wellesley anymore. But it turned out he was saving her life because she was dying. So I think at the time she was doing that, she was considering whether to marry, and she found out, you can have the kind of marriage where you can still have a career. And he built her a state-of-the-art studio, just like Daniel French's, on the campus of Loomis Chaffee School, or Loomis School. So she did marry. I think there's no defining documentation, but she was very, very close to Henry Bacon. They traveled together, which was pretty amazing for that time. Extensively, they went on vacation to the Grand Canyon, and they traveled a lot. He was married to a woman who spent quite a bit of time in Europe. Her father had been a diplomat. Anyway, and there's this great photograph of a building in Annapolis in July 4th of 1919, of a vine-covered cottage in which she underneath has written HB and EBL, July 4th, 1919. And I think that was, she was engaged by the fall, or she announced her engagement that fall. I think that was when they said goodbye to whatever their relationship was. There are great photographs of them together, and they were great colleagues. So her personal life was the French family and Bacon, primarily. And Milton Bancroft and his family, they had and there's a whole part in the book about that friendship. So it provided some tension with people in her life because she was single, kind of, doing things that most women weren't doing. Not only sculpture, but vacationing together. So she had a pretty great life, and then when she married, she became the headmistress of a boys' school and had to serve tea and do all sorts of things that she didn't really like doing, but she did it. And she served breakfast to football players, and she had assistants, staff. But that was another part of the story that was kind of intriguing, that she could make that giant leap into. And she became the mother of a 3-year-old instantly. She had quite a personal life.
I wanted to add one thing that and we talked about this when we talked on the phone, that I thought was great. After she married, she had her husband kind of managing all of like the shipping logistics and all this stuff, and I was like, he became her registrar, like for people in the museum world who know that. So I found that very funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I talked with Marilyn Rebetz, who taught at Loomis Chaffee. Never knew them, but knew lots of the stories. And, I'm talking about a man who's now kind of a family member, but he was quite a character himself and had quite a reputation and a temper. But Marilyn says that when it came to Evelyn, he just, he was like a puppy dog. So she charmed everybody.
Yes.
It's very exciting to think that you can kind of still find this amazing figure and have the opportunity to do primary source research on her, as well as depressing. But I wonder if you could talk about like that experience of uncovering a story that you thought was worth telling, and what had been written on her before this.
And what had been written on
Yeah.
her. Jeff is also a biographer, so he could talk about the fun of research. The best part, I mean, the writing is fun after you've done it, but not, well, for me, it's not while I do it. So the research was great fun, and it is just uncovering a story. She did not keep a diary. Every artist should keep a diary. Everybody should keep a diary or a journal. But she did have scrapbooks and photo albums, which were essential to me. Eventually, I went over them and over them and over them. That became really important.
And this was all at Loomis.
This was all at Loomis. I did go to, I spent a lot of time in French's collections at Chesterwood and at the Library of Congress and Williams College. They're kind of spread around, although some of those are duplicated. Chesterwood is still a great resource, and a lot of his work is there. And now some of her work is there, and they actually have an exhibit about her right now. And then Bacon's work collection is in Wesley University in Middlebury. I did go see all of her works that I could, which was really fun. But uncovering this story, I mean, really, it was because it just kept getting better. Every discovery just got better, and it seemed very lucky to keep finding things that would, little details or things that made sense, or comparing something, or it just, it was 7 years, but it was all along really fun and really an exciting little adventure to uncover her story. And some things I'd see and it didn't make sense for 3 years, and then something would come along that made it make sense.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Can you pull up the photo of the future, the young woman? There it is. I've always felt that this was a profound statement about gender relations, and calling this particular statue of a young woman and calling the statue the future suggested to me her conviction that women were coming into their own and would be everything that women are today. And it's just 1918. She lived another, 30 or 40 years after this. But I don't know. Pat, what do you think about that idea?
I think it's a beautiful idea. Don't know.
Well, we don't know. But there it is.
Yeah, I mean,
Her work speaks.
It's a beautiful, beautiful statue.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
This is in Nashville, actually. Women friends of the Parthenon in Nashville bought this.
Actually, how big is it, Pat?
I don't think it's life size.
Yeah.
I forget how big it is. I've never seen it. That's one I've not seen.
but yeah, that's, I mean, she seemed to be redefining things in her own way every time she made something almost, so. But thank you, that's a really interesting observation. Yes?
Pat, how do you think Evelyn was able or chose to reject the expectations of the time and be her own woman and go in this direction? And was it her parents? Was it herself? What made her the bold, self satisfied she was.
I think she came out of the womb that way. But I think she also, I mean, she was born in a log cabin in, believe it or not, in Ohio. And her mother died when she was 5. And her dad was a philanderer, and he actually had two wives and 2 families at the same time. And they lived together for a while in Chicago. I mean, talk about uncovering interesting things in her story. And he was not liked by her mother's family in Canada. So, and I got this part of the story from them, and they were not saying nice things about him. But Evelyn, he was a musician and an amateur painter, and she said that it was her father who told her to make beautiful things. So I credit. And she, at 6, she and her sister on one trip from Chicago to Canada, back and forth to families. She and Louise got off the train at the wrong place, little town in Ontario, and they got off at the wrong place. There was little girls, and so Evelyn picks up her bag and starts walking to the next town, which is like 10 miles away. They don't even know where they are. Louise brings her back and gets her. I don't know how they got to the right place. But I mean, 6 years old and hell bent. So, and she had their stories of ducks following her around when they lived on the farm, and she never complained about her upbringing, which was pretty impoverished and pretty brutal. I think she just had a good spirit that was determined, and she was a buoyant kind of person, and just kept doing it her way.
Thank you.
I don't know how that happens.
All right, time for one more if anyone has one. All right, well, thank you everyone so much.